Okay, so when this film comes out, it plays in New York. We submit it for distribution, and one company wants to take it, and then they don't take it. Another company wanted it. I think they went out of business. It wins at the Bare Bones Film Festival. It wins like one or two other awards and has a few other screenings. And we just can't get distribution with this thing. That's the reality of what you have to realize is that a comedic drama with no stars, that is tough to get distributed because someone has to try to take a chance on it, market it, and put it out to the public. And at that time, this is just before the sort of self-release was truly possible. Could we have made 200 VHS copies and tried to sell them to individual stores? Possibly, but their individual stores are not necessarily going to want to shell out a good amount of money for a totally unknown film. So you find yourself in a situation where you have a finished feature, it's had some praise and some play, and let's say half a dozen film festivals and screenings, but then you're at a dead end. What do you do with this film, you know? And it was incredibly frustrating. And then when the mainstream press, New York press bashed us, but the independent press loved us, it was kind of mixed signals. We didn't know what to do. We wanted to be part of the film industry. We wanted to be part of the New York film industry, and we were sort of pushed out, and it did not feel good. Everything Moves Alone did not really get proper distribution until about 10 years ago. Okay, MVD put it out with a new version of Atlanta College Prophets, and so this was on Amazon Prime and I think Google Play and maybe Xbox and a few other venues like that. So pretty decent distribution, but it took 15 years, you know? So we did not let that stop us. We made this film. We couldn't sell it to get distributed to get out to a bigger audience. We did not let that stop us. We kept pushing forward, and we made a new film. I kind of had to pull Mike and Phil and kind of convince them to make this because I was like, I'm definitely making this. And so the last attempt was to do an action movie, a Troma style action movie, and that really worked. You know, that was the one that got distributed on the earliest form of Netflix and all the movie galleries and all the Hollywood videos. It won, I think, 7 or 8 awards, played in a bunch of film festivals, and was a pretty big deal at the time. In 2005, if you had your movie out in all the video stores, that was pretty good. So that movie resulted in successes for a lot of the people involved. This movie, I will say, when I was applying to get a freelance job at CBS News in Hartford, I had an AS degree in visual communication, which had a film and video emphasis. I'd volunteered at public access television doing training for a couple years, and I had made a 90-minute 16mm feature, and I could show scenes from this. That was enough resume to actually get the job. This did open doors. It opened doors slowly, and it opened, let's say, smaller doors than I would have liked, but it did open doors. And usually doing a feature-length film, putting that much effort into something and putting it out there will open some doors. We were just out of college when we were making this movie. We didn't even have proper catering, and that is one of the biggest things you kind of have to provide. I mean, it was us and just 2 or 3 other people. It was myself, Phil, Mike, and then we would have maybe 3 other crew members. They were just friends of ours, like Matt Ford, Jen Gray. There was a few people that would come in and come out. They'd work for a couple days, and so they would cycle in for a few days and cycle out. Our faces are lit up because we're using a piece of whiteboard to reflect light onto our face there. And you had to do that with film at the time. I think we were using 400 speed Fujifilm. And so it was tough because you actually did need a lot of light. 400 speed is not that... It was fast back then, but now if you need light on a modern camera, like a Blackmagic or a Sony, just pop the ISO button up to 800 to even 1,000, and it's it can be okay. There was a lot of exposure problems with these scenes, and in post, the lab were able to actually lighten some of these up. We got lucky in a way. They were having trouble with the lab equipment, so they passed through our film, and a lot of it was exposed unevenly, and so we're like, well, we paid for this, it's got to, like, a scene would just suddenly get brighter and darker, and we're like, we can't use this. And so they redid it for us, but they said, well, would you like anything lighter or darker? And so we pointed out a few scenes to make lighter or darker. And so the wonderful thing about film is there's so much information there, color information and contrast ratio, steps from lights to dark, that in post you can reprocess the film and push the film to make lighter, and it will actually hold up. Whereas if you shot something and you're underexposed or overexposed and you try to brighten it up or darken it, the video at the time would just fall apart. Everything would be a grainy mess. So there's a huge advantage of capturing your film in 16 millimeter at the time. Some would argue there still is. I mean, the shooting in 70 millimeter, for instance, that negative is gigantic. It's such a huge amount of color information and resolution that some people will say, no, it just looks, better. But then there's other people that argue, you could shoot like in 8K with certain red cameras and stuff like that. So it's tough. At a certain point, you start to think, well, how much resolution is really enough? If you go back and pick through, let's say, comedies from the 90s, the less popular comedies that were direct to video, and you go back and watch them, they're all pretty cringy, So it's comedy is tough. There are some tremendous comedies that I think will stand the test of time. A lot of people think of like, Airplane or Monty Python, is always going to be funny, like Monty Python, The Holy Grail, things like that. But most comedy is not, and the truth is, most films do not hold up. Vast majority of films are just not going to be. I hate the word relevant because people use it as a sort of a club, but it is true that in 50 years, either people will be watching your film or they won't. So most of the work that you're going to do, it's true. Maybe no one will be watching in 50 years, but as artists, it's not up to us to worry about that kind of thing so much. As an artist, you really should be creating. You should be putting work out there. Be careful about chasing perfection too much. It's as they say in Tron Legacy, it's perfection's unknowable. More than anything, if you're an artist, you should try to make art, and you should do it because it will make you feel good, and then you may find an audience. For me, I would say I only found an audience in the last 6 or 7 years with the VHS Massacre documentaries, VHS Massacre and VHS Massacre 2. Those are the biggest things I've ever done, and I still get invited to do interviews and all sorts of stuff, and it's been a long time. There's less call for these kind of movies, but you will be surprised every now and then. Things will have a resurgence. Land of College Prophets about 5 years ago, there was a number of podcasts randomly did podcasts about that. They had found the DVD at like the dollar store, and there's a few series that were doing dollar store movie reviews. This scene was the first scene we shot. We took the camera, including this part. We took the camera, I think, for a weekend to try it out, and we shot one roll of film, and we actually used almost the whole roll. That scene was complete, and this scene was complete. And so it was an experiment, and we got the footage back, and it looked great. We were like, we can actually do this. If you had ever grown up watching movies and how good they looked, and the only access you ever had to film equipment was like Super 8 or like VHS, when you finally shot a scene from the film you were going to make, it was like a miracle. It was like, oh my God, we can do this. It's not some magical process. With enough training, you can just do it yourself. Now, if you look at how to make films in 2023, 2024, it is so much easier. I mean, you should not shoot on your phone unless you're doing B-roll on a documentary or something. Invest a little bit in a cinema camera for about $1,200. I always recommend the Blackmagic 4K Pocket. Get a couple lenses from the thrift store and adapters to make them fit on the mount, and you're good to go. Start shooting. I always bring up that movie L'Argent, I think it's called. It means money. French film, and the director Bresson, I think his name was. He shot the whole thing with a 47 millimeter lens. Shot the whole movie that way. So, look, we don't have to be too snobby about filmmaking, but if you want your film and your story to be taken seriously, the reason why they call them cinema cameras is because a lot of them will shoot in Kodaks. Kodak means coder decoder, and it means the file format and the information is very large. So Blackmagic you can shoot in Apple ProRes, HQ. Excellent Kodak. It's manageable. You could cut on a Mac. Could cut in 4K. Because of the color information, you can color grade it and get it to look like a film. Nowadays, in order to get things to look like cinema, a lot of it ends up in post. But that also means that the camera you use has to create files with a lot of color information. That's why I would recommend cinema cameras versus just a DSLR or something like that. So this whole thing was shot with, we just had one boom mic. I think it was a Sennheiser boom mic, nothing super expensive. And we didn't want to just use a tape recorder, right? So we really used this Sony mini CD thing and actually get CD quality capturing, which was okay at the time. The price was kept pretty low on all of this stuff. Okay, so we had one main location, and that was essentially my parents' house, and then this is neighboring towns around that, so it's all about 10 minutes away. A lot of the fields and the trees and stuff, all that stuff is within like sort of a 5 to 10 minute drive from the house. And that meant too we could drive back there and have lunch. And the crew was like really small. It was only like us in one car and then like a couple of people in another car. So when it was lunchtime, sometimes we'd even just go to McDonald's and eat lunch and then start up again. So we would try to time things out where it was like, okay, we can take a lunch break after we shoot this stuff because we're changing locations, and we just go to D&D and grab some bagels or something. So we just did it that way. We kept it super simple. You can only do that if it's a super small crew. But the other location was this location's in Collinsville, and that was a good 25 minutes away. And because of that, when we were leaving, we had to bring everything with us and sort of plan to shoot the entire day at Collinsville. Because if you can imagine, if it's 25 minutes or a half hour one way and 25 minutes a half hour the other way, you're losing an hour just to commute back and forth. So essentially, when you're shooting in like 10 or 12 days, you can't do that. So you have to... So when you're leaving your central location to go to another place, you're just there all day. And that's what we did. So there is a double-edged sword to making independent films, because in one hand you're trying to push the envelope and, let's say, be edgy through comedy or anything through violence or just anything subversive, new ideas, things like that. And the problem is that some of this stuff won't age well. So it's something to consider. When I interviewed Debbie Rochon for the VHS Massacre movies, she would talk about the ebb and flow and acceptability of certain language and ideas and stuff like that. So you will find when you're making a movie, it's tough because as an independent filmmaker, you really do want to be pushing the envelope. But at the same time, things are not always good. There's no crystal ball exactly into what's going to be perceived as kind of okay or not. But at the same time, as artists, like, it would be a shame if we were constantly censoring ourselves and stuff like that. So Soldier flashbacks, we did, there was a kitchen we had access to, Mike's dad got us access to this kitchen that looked more like a institutional kitchen. It was, large. All the equipment was heavy duty, obviously for preparing large meals, stuff like that, like the back of a cafeteria or something. And then we had the flashbacks on, and in the flashbacks you can actually see military vehicles blurred out in the background. The way we did that was we found a public park where you could shoot public, and it was cool. But in the background, there were military vehicles because there actually was a military parking lot. I think they were sort of like whatever decommissioned military vehicles, but it was just a see-through fence. So we positioned our fake soldiers in front of the fence, and then you could see military vehicles to the back. So I thought it was a clever way of getting a little production value there without really doing much. You're going to see this. This is not just a pan, it also moves up a little bit. There's a few crane shots in this movie. My dad and I built this jib before these lightweight jibs really existed. We used electrical conduit, and there was a special lever on it so that the head would stay level. And so at the end of the film, you'll see these crane shots. At the beginning of the film, you see these crane shots. We probably got half a dozen crane shots. And we did that by making this homemade dolly. Nowadays, you could buy a drone and do those shots that will feel like a crane shot, just moving up and showing the whole town. We had to put a wide-angle lens on it and then put it up as high as we could. And that towards the end of the film, you'll see there's a shot, and it looks fairly high up. And then the other thing too is we couldn't afford a dolly, so I found this and talking with my dad about how to solve this problem of like having a dolly. We were at Home Depot and we saw this garden cart with big blow up tires. So what we did is we actually deflated the tires a little bit, and then we could put a tripod. I could stand on the tripod, or Mike could stand on the tripod and shoot. And because there's a little give to the tires, it would absorb the bumps, and there was a handle on it. So basically we could make, I think they would call that like a Western dolly or a doorway dolly. It just was it was just a garden cart on wheels. You could still do that if you want that. That would still work nowadays. Of course, there are so many cheap alternatives. Now you can buy a dolly that has rails, super lightweight, super portable, probably for $300 or $400, and you could just stick a lightweight tripod on, and you don't have to stand on it. What you would just do is mount the camera and move with it. And so that's what you do. That's what you do nowadays. But back then it was not possible. Dollies were very expensive, and cranes were impossibly expensive. There was a lot of technical stuff that we did in this film that you would not normally expect from a $9,000 16mm feature at the time. Cranes and dollies and all these other scenes. But we were really committed to it. We really wanted to do something special. We were hoping that people noticed. They sort of did.